yourself.
Istanbul offers great universities and the lifestyle is really amazing here.
So I live at the dorms at Maltepe University and I'm really happy with it. There's a cleaning service every few days and then there's the library nearby which is open 24/7.
My first impression when I came was like, it's huge. You have everything in one place.
When you first come to Maltepe University, you don't know where what is and you're like, oh my God, I need help. Guess what? You're not alone. There is the international office people over there. They're like family. They're very helpful and they're always there for you.
Istanbul is the perfect mixture between ancient and modern. Coming into this city helps me discover myself, learn about so many different cultures, learning about the world, which will help me in writing future books.
At Maltepe University, we have a lot of research centers. Because of that, we have the ability to participate in a lot of international projects.
Here at Maltepe University, the education consists of both practical and theoretical. We get the opportunity to practice everything we learn in class in real life. So after we graduate, we have a degree and we can work all over the world.
People come to Istanbul all the time, but what they really miss when they visit are the antique shops, which contain thousands of years of memories and also a thread of the modern future.
I like to use every minute and just get out and hop on the ferry and just go from the Asian side to the European side and just enjoy the wonderful weather with the wonderful Bosphorus behind me and just enjoying the moment of Istanbul.
Istanbul is very beautiful with great culture.
This city is the symbol of diversity. Come and study at Maltepe University.
Come here and feel like you're home.
Hello and good morning. Dear professors, dear participants and esteemed guests, it is a great honor for me to welcome you all in the opening ceremony of the 9th edition of Maltepe University International Student Congress. I am Semanur Solak, a senior student at the Faculty of Communication, and I am honored to be co-president of the Congress for this year. As Maltepe University International Student Congress, it gives us the opportunity, students all around the world, to express their knowledge and ideas on various issues since 2013. This year, 28 participants from 10 different countries are going to share their knowledge and ideas under the umbrella of Towards Sustainable Societies, Prospects and Retrospects main team. I would like to thank our university to give us the opportunity to hold this Congress, our lecturers who gives us the support, and all my teammates for the great effort they have shown throughout the year. We all worked hard to make this Congress happen. While I'll complete my speech, I hope this Congress provides you a good atmosphere to exchange scientific ideas, inspire new researchers, and new contacts for closer cooperations. Now, I leave the stage to Professor Hasan Ünal from the Department of Political Science and International Relations, Maltepe University.
Hello hello everybody. Hello and welcome to all of you, all the participants from all over the world to our international student conference. Unfortunately, because of the COVID pandemic, we are organizing this one once again online, but we all hope here, all the organizers, team leader, Müge and others, all of us expect you next year to be on our beautiful campus and beautiful city, Istanbul, for the conference. This conference has become a brand of the Maltepe University over the years. Although I'm one of the newcomers, presumably, to the Maltepe University, I really enjoy it. And with your participation next year, I'm sure it's going to be it is already a promising and very productive conference this year, and it's going to be more and more of that. Well, I'm a professor of international relations dealing with international affairs, particularly Turkish foreign policy and all the related affairs. But when you talk about Turkish foreign policy, then you would be dealing with enormous problems and at the same time solution proposals all floated around, because Turkey has been like a piece of an island of peace. It is most of the time over the last few decades basically surrounded by a number of problems and flashpoints, basically crises breaking out one after the other. But fortunately, we seem to be avoiding all the crises. But at the same time, it is important to have a look at all of them from both a strategic and a historical perspective, and then with a view to coming up with new ideas and food for thought. And this is what I'm going to be doing for today. When Müge, the conference team leader, asked me to basically address all of you here at the preliminary session for a few minutes, I thought what I would actually talk about. And I said, well, because the conference covers a plethora, a huge, a number of different fields with very prospectively interesting presentations by all of you, I thought it may be a good idea to just talk about very briefly multipolarity, into which we are fast evolving. Now, with the war in Ukraine, basically what I'm going to do here, I'll give you just some thoughts and some ideas, food for thought, as they say. Basically, as the war broke out in Ukraine, my analysis of it in terms of world politics and world security, which is also related to a number of other things like international human rights, like international supply chain management, and international prospective or potential food crisis and other matters related to all of that. Basically, my observations are, these are very raw observations, I would say, but something I'm still working on. The first is that we have three battles unfolding. Now, one is the actual war between Russia and Ukraine on the territory of Ukraine. What it is going to lead to is important, but there are also further and other important aspects to that. The second war seems to be basically fought on the media. We have the media and the social media in which there is incredible battle between those who support Ukraine and between those who support Russia one way or the other. And more importantly, in terms of multipolarity, I think what we are witnessing is that we have a group of countries who have been basically challenging the single polar world order that had been in place for some decades after the disintegration of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, basically. Trying to turn the world into multipolarity. And those, namely the United States and its allies, who are basically trying to preserve the US-led hegemonic single polar world order. What it is going to lead to is at this stage difficult to say. It remains to be seen whether it is going to lead to clear-cut multipolarity with some sort of spheres of influence across the world, with some sort of perhaps new world order. But I can just, also utter a few remarks about what it might lead to. But instead of basically coming up with clear-cut remarks, perhaps I'll just sort of float around some questions and remarks. Now, for instance, in a multipolar world order, and also during the course of the evolution into the multipolar world order, how are we going to basically ensure that the supply changes work properly to feed the people, to get things done, and all that related to that? Or whether these supply chain management is going to be hit in a major way, and then it is going to require, further arrangements in order to get things done. And other things, for instance, in a multipolar world order, how are you going to basically preserve and also promote international human rights, all the values we have had over the decades, all the values that we have developed together? Just a few things. And my remarks and or I would say my guess is that the way it is going to develop into some sort of a world order seems to suggest that we are going to be seeing more and more regional alliances, countries sort of edging towards each other rather than edging apart regionally, but also edging apart from each other in a global context, perhaps. But certainly in a regional context, countries sort of edging towards each other. And then this would lead to perhaps regional alliances, regional realignments. As we've just seen, for instance, some of the countries totally out of the blue coming out and sort of realigning themselves as the three battles basically began to unfold as the war in Ukraine broke out. So one of my guesses is that there is going to be more and more regional alignments. And the second, there's going to be presumably more regional, as part of the regional alignments, and perhaps as the world order gets less effective in terms of its impact on preserving the world order, the hegemonic world order, there is greater likelihood that there may be more regional clashes and wars, but at a regional level. And it is again there is greater likelihood that there's going to be more and more regional cooperation in every field: economy, trade, trade-wise, and in all sorts of sectors and fields. Now, how all these things are going to play out remains to be seen right now. But there is few problems that we are going to basically, that is presumably going to pop up all the time in our discussions. When we talk about multipolarity, it's quite understandable that the multipolarity basically is the basis of the world order over the centuries. Yeah, if you basically study the political history of the world, say from whatever period you take it from, what you see is a multipolar world order. But this time, the multipolarity we are going to have is going to have certain features of its own. Now, if we take the world political history from the 1500 onwards, what we see is multipolarity, but mostly basically among the European great powers. Okay, it is going to be for the first time that that we are going to witness a multipolar world order with major powers, the great powers, or at least some of them, like China, or some other like Russia, who are either not in the continent or in the continent of Europe, or like in the case of China, who is not regarded as a European power. And we are going to see more of that with new great powers emerging. And then we are going to have medium-sized powers, quite a number of them, and that they are not necessarily be all of them within the European continent either. There's going to be plenty of them, basically, all around, scattered across the world map. And all of them are going to play some role depending on, in accordance with the strength and power of their own. Now, this is important. And the other point I'd like to make, with which I'd like to also conclude with all these questions and ideas basically thrown at you, if you like, food for thought, is that we are going to have a multipolar world for the first time, with major countries having enormous nuclear weapons in their stocks, in their arsenal. Now, how would you basically ensure that a nuclear war doesn't happen is going to be a question for all the statesmen, experts on strategy, journalists, investigative journalists, and others to look at, to basically ponder upon. It's not going to be easy, but one way or the other, people and states find ways around basically managing things. This is going to be another and interesting part of it, a part of the new multipolar world order that we are going to witness. Now, with these somewhat provocative, somewhat, perhaps out of context remarks and views, I'd like to conclude. But before I conclude, once again, I express my wish, once again, that we'll see you next time, next year. Hopefully that there's going to be no monkeypox, anything, any other pandemic disrupting our daily life, all in Istanbul and on our campus, which is, when I say beautiful, is not a joke, and you will, when you come round, you will see it. And with the best, or with all my best wishes for a successful conference, and thanking you for your patience, listening, for listening to me, I conclude and welcome you once again to our conference. Bye-bye for now, and greetings to all of you.
We would like to thank Ms. Professor Hassan to his valuable speech. And now our Congress's keynote speaker, Assistant Professor Sinan Odabaşı, Department of Law from Altınbaş University, to giving his speech titled Sustainable Development and International Law, Reflections and International Documents. The stage is yours.
Good morning from Istanbul, first of all, and I also like to thank the organizing committee, especially a great thanks to Dr. Müge Neda Altınoklu for her valuable work here, and I'm of course honored to be here with you today, this morning. So what I'd like to do today, I'll try to provide you a framework, just as the international community tried to achieve exactly 30 years ago, over the course of the conference in Rio de Janeiro. And the conference had a coveted title of the World Summit. Of course, the field of sustainable development is vast. It includes almost every aspect of power, governance, class relations, economic activities, social institutions, and cultural traditions. The list goes on and on. The 2030 Agenda of the UN accommodates 17 Sustainable Development Goals and 169 targets that are attached to these. So in other words, it is perhaps the best fit for that famous English phrase, everything under the sun. Therefore, an immediate difficulty introduces itself to us. It is the difficulty of translating the sustainable development language into the language of law. And of course, we need the language of law when we are going to write down new rules, defining legal principles, making legal interpretation, and creating legal precedents. Because the legal language is quite different from what is being used in philosophical theses, theoretical understandings, or even moral principles. Of course, all these are roots of legal rules. But in contrast with these mentioned formulations, legal rules require kind of a clarity. And in the best case, they should not leave much room for different interpretation. Yet, what the concept of sustainable development indicates, it is a huge amalgamation of various concerns, development needs, and the different routes that countries or communities pursue to achieve these ends. Creating legally binding rules and principles, and especially international ones, come with endless challenges. So it is not surprising that both Millennium Development Goals and Sustainable Development Goals were prescribed in the form of policy documents or declarations, and not in the forms of treaties or conventions. Yet I believe the whole concept of sustainable development is still ripe for making legal deliberations, more likely when different aspects of it are taken one by one. Here, the roots of sustainable development comes into play. Environmental concerns, these are. Above all, sustainable development is a response to the pollution of oceans. It is a response to the loss of almost half of the total amount of the world's forest in the last century. It is a response to the rising temperatures or the melting down of glaciers or the species that went extinct. And all this environmental degradation, which the prevailing modes of production, distribution, and consumption had caused. It had been somewhat authoritatively, we can say, defined in the Brundtland Report of 1987 as development that addresses the needs for the current generations without endangering the needs of the future generations. So what happened in Rio then in 1992? There were a couple of documents that were produced, among others, but two of them were most prolific ones. The other being the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, but today I'm going to address the UN Declaration on Environment and Development. This Rio 1992 Declaration takes from this definition of the Brundtland Report and other precedents and goes on to formulate a list of principles, sort of a manifesto. Here, the overarching idea is that the planet is the common heritage of humankind, not the property of a bunch of industrialized or wealthy nations. And in order to save the planet, however, efforts must be made by each member of the international community, and of course these are being states, in their respective sovereign lands and territorial seas and waters. So, what we have here is the commitment made here is of an international character, meaning that all signatory states made a promise towards a group of states that they are going to implement these principles. But the practical implementation will take place within their national sovereign lands and territories. Of course, this has much to do with the fundamental reasoning of international environmental law, and that is, the environment is best protected where it was in danger of degradation. And this actually echoes a fundamental principle of protection of human rights. Whatever the international mechanisms to monitor the protection of human rights are best protected where they are violated. So, international human rights mechanisms act in a complementary fashion. When the domestic or national protection mechanisms or remedies don't provide enough satisfaction to those who were victims of human rights violations. When the Universal Declaration on Human Rights was drafted just after the Second World War, the idea was to provide such a complementary mechanism. In the end, this was not achieved, and this task was left to future conventions and treaties. Nevertheless, the Universal Declaration had managed to do something quite fascinating. It influenced national legislations, mostly in the form of constitutions, to include the list of rights and related principles. Many constitutions that were adopted after World War II and during the 1960s, and especially those of newly independent countries, follow the traces of this perhaps the most influential UN document ever produced. So coming back to our main topic, the Rio Declaration, it made a similar impact, I should say. Over the course of the last 30 years, new constitutions or constitutional amendments around the world, developed and developing nations alike, made references to sustainable development. Some of these seem to be merely aspirational, either declaring the belief or commitment of the state or the society, or sometimes both, towards sustainable development. Some others, especially more recent documents coming from countries such as the Dominican Republic and Cuba, are more invested in. They draw a nexus between development, sustainability, and climate change. In one of my research projects, I have found out that out of 140 constitutions reviewed, almost half of them carry a sort of a reference to either one or more than one principle of sustainable development. So here was the chart. Those are those countries that are in the color orange, were the countries in which their constitutions do not carry yet a reference to sustainable development, while others, kind of distinguished according to their level of development, all carries a degree of reference regarding sustainable development. And of course, in some countries which don't actually have sustainable development principles in their constitution, there's a trick there, because some of these countries actually carry the common law tradition, where concept of a constitution is quite different, such as the USA and Australia. And in these countries, there are specific legislations regulating environmental impact assessments. And environmental impact assessments is probably the most practical way to implement sustainable development in our daily lives. And environmental impact assessments actually rely on two fundamental principles of sustainable development, namely the precautionary principle and environmental participation. So now let's have a quick look at Principle 15 of the Rio Declaration, the precautionary principle. Here, even the possibility of environmental damage is enough reason to apply protective measures for the environment. This principle influenced many legislations, and it is especially relevant in the case of environmental impact assessments. So according to this principle, states must take precautionary measures in order to prevent environmental damage that can be caused by an economic development project. This can be either building a dam over a river, or making highways or bridges, or extracting underground resources, and even opening some factories, so on. So any kind of economic activity can fall in this category. And when environmental damage is not for sure, is not certain, if there is doubt whether an environmental damage is going to happen or not, then this doubt should be interpreted in the favor of the environment, and protective measures should be taken anyway. Secondly, the environmental participation. Here, this principle, the principle number 10 of the Rio Declaration, clearly provides three essential elements for environmental participation. I don't want to bother you with these slides, so I'm just going to go to this kind of an infographic, which will be much more visual. And these are access to information, participation in the decision making, and access to processes and remedies. First of all, we should say that these three essential elements are interlinked. There isn't a degree of hierarchy among them. And actually, in the graph, there should be some arrows going through each other, but I think the software is kind of missing that. So anyway, so access to information, participation in the decision-making, and access to processes and remedies are together taught as three pillars of environmental democracy. And as a first step, of course, access to information on environmental issues, because this makes perfect sense. One should need to be informed properly if he or she is going to make a meaningful contribution to a process such complicated as an environmental impact assessment. Second on the list is participation in the decision making. We can say that this should be actually the heart of this environmental democracy. And it may take different forms. But there is this thing here, because environmental impact assessment is essentially an administrative process. And governments, whether be it national or local, may not always be willing to share their mandates with the local population in a kind of a profound way. So in practice, generally, participation in decision-making processes is of advisory character. That is conducted through public meetings that bring together the owners of the project, companies or governments, and the community in the locality of that project. So the idea here in the participation in decision-making aspect of this scheme is to hear the concerns of the community and address these concerns and make alterations to the given economic project when it is deemed necessary. So in the end, there will be an administrative decision, and this decision ideally should take the concerns and wishes of the local population into account. But sometimes, and unfortunately, maybe in most cases, administrative bodies may fail in this task. So what should be the next step? And it comes the third aspect of environmental democracy, that is access to processes and remedies. So this final phase of participation is useful in preventing damage when previous instruments of environmental participation are proven to be ineffective. This can take form in the appealing the decisions of administrative bodies, taking matters to higher courts for the cancellation of a project maybe, or claiming redress or compensation for damages either against individuals and communities, but also for those against the nature itself. These all fall in this category. And I should say, for those of you who like to practice law in this field, this is a vibrant section of environmental litigation everywhere around the world. And courts do make progressive interpretations for the protection of the environment. Not all courts, but some. We are seeing and reading there some exemplary judgments in these matters. But this doesn't mean that such judgments are always effective, or contradictions might be resolved solely through judicial remedies. In recent past, some of these progressive interpretations went further to designate natural resources such as rivers or lakes as right holders, just like human beings. There are some cases in this sense we can see in Latin America, in India to a degree, and in Australia. For example, I would like to now, at this point of my time here, to make some practical references in order to clarify how these contradictions can influence the implementation of sustainable development principles. So the example I'd like to suggest for today, this morning, is from Colombia. The Constitutional Court of Colombia, while reviewing a case related to degradation caused by mining activities, decided that the river Atrato, this was the site of that mining activities, the location. The river Atrato itself has the right to be protected and appointed a commission for this end. That commission was composed of one government and one community representative to make decisions regarding the ecologic well-being of the river. So a couple of similar judgments came from Ecuador as well in these last 10 or 15 years. So there is this trend in the mindset of judges and law practitioners, because they also share, of course, as we all, the planet, and they're concerned about the well-being of our future generations and the planet in general. But on the other hand, can we say that this is a kind of a common belief of the humankind at the point, or are we doing everything based on these understandings? It is hardly so, because modern-day Colombia is perhaps one of the most dangerous locations for environmental activists. The UN Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights made several statements about the increasing number of local environmental activists being killed or subjected to severe human rights violations. And of course, I'm not mentioning here this terrible trend to name and shame the Latin American country, nor to single them out among a kind of a multitude of other locations in which environmental activists face similar threats or dangers. But rather, I would like to draw your attention to the contradictions that surround the concept of sustainable development. I believe, arguably, this contradiction arises from the shortcomings of institutional solutions to problems that should be approached in a strategic way. Without changing the conditions for the reckless exploitation of natural resources, there is not much to accomplish through few idealist progressive legal practitioners. But this doesn't mean that that decision of the Colombian Constitutional Court was in vain or so. This is actually a field of struggle. Another contradiction is the gap between legislative frameworks, namely codes and statutes, and their actual implementation. So here I'd like to point out to the definitions of environmental impact assessment, and I'm in this last final part of my talk today, I'd like to address some specific problems in Turkish practice. So the first definition is made by the International Association for Impact Assessment, and the second one is the definition provided by the Turkish law. And we can see that these are not far from each other. And actually the definition in Turkish law is kind of a bit more comprehensive, and it provides some practical solutions as well. For example, if there are some aspects in the economic project that can be harmful to the environment, alternatives should be provided, including maybe alternative project sites and technologies, and so on. And Turkey enacted these laws just after the Rio summit, by the way, in 1994. Since 1994, Turkish system has environmental impact assessment. But now, please allow me to share some statistics from the Turkish Ministry of Environment, Urbanization, and Climate Change. And of course, the ultimate element of this kind of long titled climate change was added very recently after Turkey became a state party to Paris Agreement last autumn. So, but before than that, maybe I should provide a very brief explanation about environmental impact assessment processes. According to Turkish law, not all projects require an environmental impact assessment. First, we have some projects that are categorically subject to environmental impact assessments. So these are required by law to have environmental impact assessments in activities in certain sectors. But then we have a significantly larger amount of sectors that is going to be put through a test, as we can call it, kind of an eligibility test. So the test is being done by administrative bodies, by the bodies that are attached to the ministry. And in the end of the test, the administration decides whether the project requires an environmental impact assessment or not. In Turkish, for our Turkish followers, just to make it more understandable for you, we call this, of course, çevresel etki değerlendirmesi. So in the end of this eligibility test, the administration either renders a decision, says, yes, environmental impact assessment is necessary here, or it says environmental impact assessment is not necessary for the implementation of this project. So these numbers are taken from the website of the ministry, and it covers from the beginning of the environmental impact assessments in Turkey almost until now, until the last couple of years. So in this first 25 or 6 years of history, some more than 60,000 projects reviewed for environmental impact assessment eligibility. But only just a bit more than 1,000 projects were assigned for environmental impact assessments, while others, some 62,000 of them, that were not assigned for environmental impact assessment. In other words, the government or the administration said that, okay, these projects seem to be fine, and we don't need to further investigate whether they're going to create significant dangers to the environment. And strikingly, almost half of these projects that were not assigned with an environmental impact assessment were related to mining and or other petroleum or extractive projects. So of course it is difficult to imagine how a mining project, an extractive industry's economic activity, is not going to make any impact on the environment or the community concerned. Therefore, it immediately increases some suspicions regarding the effectiveness of Turkish environmental impact assessment processes. And of course, this is a dilemma faced not only by Turkey, but by many developing countries in this regard. And of course, it will be misleading to blame this gap between law and practice on the irresponsibility of administrative authorities. As with the previous contradiction, which I tried to provide through an example of Colombia, the surrounding conditions should be taken into account. Turkey, of course, being a G20 developing country, traditionally relies much on imports for energy sources. And of course, since the last 75 or 80 years, maybe, Turkey suffers a trade deficit. Sometimes it impacts its economy quite profoundly and creates economic crisis and so on. So any government that comes to power has one of its priorities to cut down this trade deficit. And probably the most practical way to do is to limit its energy dependency, or limits its import dependency in energy resources. So the all the rivers or all the underground minerals and so on. So all these resources seem to be sources of energy for the governments that came to power. And again, this is not a unique dilemma to Turkey, but Turkey kind of experiences this in a kind of a bit more serious way, if we can say. So, and this is perhaps the essential question of sustainable development. And obviously, there are not easy answers. Maintaining a balance between development needs and the sustainability of the environment, or the protection of the nature, if we're going to be a bit more naturistic approach. And yes, we have frameworks that, such as provided in Rio 1992. And these frameworks on their own, not capable of delivering results, but they're not, they shouldn't be seen as unworthy of anything, because they give us a set of principles, a method to identify problems and solutions, and a vocabulary to work with while addressing our practical needs for development and the protection of the environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Odabaşı, for your inspirational speech. And we will continue with the section 1 presentations after this speech.
This is the place to find yourself.
Istanbul offers great universities and the lifestyle is really amazing here.
So I live at the dorms at Maltepe University and I'm really happy with it. There's a cleaning service every few days, and then there's the library nearby, which is open 24/7.
My first impression when I came was like, it's huge. You have everything in one place.
When you first come to Maltepe University, you don't know where what is and you're like, oh my God, I need help. Guess what? You're not alone. There is the international office people over there. They're like family. They're very helpful and they're always there for you.
Istanbul is the perfect mixture between ancient and modern. Coming into this city helps me discover myself, learn about so many different cultures, learning about the world, which will help me in writing future books.
At Maltepe University, we have a lot of research centers. Because of that, we have the ability to participate in a lot of international projects.
Here at Maltepe University, the education consists of both practical and theoretical. We get the opportunity to practice everything we learn in class in real life. So after we graduate, we have a degree and we can work all over the world.
People come to Istanbul all the time, but what they really miss when they visit are the antique shops, which contain thousands of years of memories and also a thread of the modern future.
I like to use every minute and just get out and hop on the ferry and just go from the Asian side to the European side and just enjoy the wonderful weather with the wonderful Bosphorus behind me and just enjoying the moment of Istanbul.
Istanbul is very beautiful with great culture.
This city is the symbol of diversity. Come and study at Maltepe University.
Come here and feel like you're home.